If I had to sum up Toxic Rain, I suppose it would be a jack of all trades and a master of none. Don't let that dissuade you from the build though, because this build can do all content, all map mods, budget friendly, league starter viable, or level 100 viable, hardcore viable, good clear speed, mid-tier defenses, and good old-fashioned easy bossing. And for those few players that care about this, it's also solo self-found viable because the one item we need is actually very farmable. Alrighty, so let's jump into the nitty-gritty, which is probably going to be the mechanics side of things. So I looked, far and wide for all the information I could possibly get my hands on, and there actually isn't a lot out there. There's actually not even a lot of build guides for this, let alone a lot of accurate ones, and I pretty much had to do a lot of self-discovery, self-testing, which actually made this build super fun for me, and which is why we ended up picking it in the first place. The big thing I think we need to get out of the way right now is probably damage. This is normally the biggest issue with Toxic Rain. So how do we get so much damage? Well, the damage can be split up into about 4 different sections, which we need to explain individually. The first one we're going to want to get out of the way is probably the just your regular generic chaos damage. Okay, so there's only so much chaos damage you can get. You get it on every single slot, right? You get it on your gloves, get it on the quiver, get it every other area you can, get it all over your tree and stuff like that. And then it's like, okay, well now I've hit the cap, right? Got all the chaos damage I can, I got a couple of increased damage multipliers, and then there's nothing else that helps me scale my damage aside from gem levels, right? You then get, your level 21 Toxic Rain, you get the Empower, you get the +3 bow, and then you're just like, damn man, I've hit that wall. And that's around about where everyone seems to stop this build, and then they're just like, okay, the single target sucks. This is where I'm going to introduce probably the second mechanic, right, which is skill effect duration. So we've had a pretty limited run on this, and most people weren't even utilizing this beforehand, but its skill effect duration is probably the next thing you're going to want, because the pods that land, right, are actually affected by skill effect duration. So the longer they're on the ground, the more dot damage you're actually getting. And what I mean by that is, if you scale skill effect duration, the amount of time it takes for the pod to explode and disappear is actually significantly longer, and I'll hopefully show that in some footage right now. So how would this give us more damage, right? Well, the reason why it gives us more damage is because these dots actually scale infinitely, as in they can overlap on each other. So the longer they're down, the more time I have to get more pods, which means the more time I have for them to overlap. Now that's when we're going to get into the third mechanic, area of effect, when it comes to overlap. So when you shoot down your arrows and the pods spawn on the ground, there's actually these little vines that then latch onto enemies. These little vines are what actually does the damage over time component of the skill. So it's not the explosion, it's not just the arrow hitting, it's actually the vines that come off the pods that do the damage over time. And there can be infinite of these depending on how many pods you have, right? How far the vines can actually reach from the pods is affected by area of effect, not just the explosion at the end. So with more area of effect, it means that more vines are connecting to the one target, which overall increases your single target damage. And this is the part where people get wrong pretty often, you know what I mean? So like, say you've got the chaos damage, you've got the the skill effect duration, you've got all these things in place, but you don't have AoE, you've only got 2 pods latching to the one target. What we want to do in the end, right, is get about 100 pods attaching to one target, all doing the same amount of dot damage. So then once you've got all these things together, right, the final element is probably going to be attack speed, because I want to maximize pods per second. So the easy way to look at this is basically just more attacks per second equals more pods per second. The skill effect duration helps them last longer, and the area of effect helps them overlap. There's still one more component that we also take into consideration when it comes to attacks per second, and that is the number of projectiles. So the reason why this is important, right, is because the more projectiles you get, the more you actually increase the spread between the pods. So this is actually like the true AoE on this build. So, when you increase the area of effect, using area of effect, right, you just get more overlap. You don't actually increase the spread. When you get extra projectiles, you do actually increase the spread, therefore you need more AoE to supplement with this at the same time for it to work effectively. So you need to find a comfortable balance depending on how you feel the build is progressing. So I've been testing this myself, pretty religiously this league. I haven't done the most amount of testing ever, but I've got like a little bit of a rule of thumb for everyone to follow, which would be for every 50% increased AoE you get, you can add a projectile to the build. So you're going to by default sort of get 4, then you're going to get a level 21, so this is going to put you at 5 projectiles anyway. At that point, you need about 50% AoE for most of them to overlap. At 100% AoE, you need about 6 projectiles. At 150, you can go 7. At 200%, which is the endgame version, you can have about 8 projectiles. Now these aren't always going to overlap unless the enemy stays very, very still in the center, and sometimes they're just a little bit out from what I can tell. However, the enemy also moves around, so take that into consideration, but for the most part, you need 50% AoE for every single extra projectile you add to the build. So there you go guys, that's pretty much everything you need to know about how to scale the damage, and this is the reason why we have so much damage. However, before we get into just like the sort of regular build guide, I want to sort of go over one other controversial topic which is probably going to come up, and that is going to be, why am I using a Cool Rain over the +3 bow? easiest answer would be because your gearing's eventually going to lean towards this anyway. So even before I had attack speed, I tested this last league, and I actually got crazy similar results. So basically, I tested just a Quill Rain on its own versus, you know, in a regular 6-link, no plus levels in this one actually. And then I tested it against the, you know, the +3 bow. Back then, perfectly rolled, yet again 40x. I think I paid 45 for it or something like that, sold it for 20. And when I tested it, they had crazy similar results, which was kind of weird for me. I was just like, okay, this is where I started thinking pods per second, right? Because I'm like, attack speed seems to do more for my damage than, you know, actual just raw damage. So POB is always going to show you bigger numbers. It's like, oh, each pod's doing more, therefore your dot damage was better. This has been changed very, very recently, so that it's got a different calculation now. I don't know how the new calculation works, but I'm assuming it's not that accurate either. So I'm eventually going to go over it myself, and it's always going to be fluctuating damage, but to some degree, right, I wouldn't really trust the POB ever on this, because I think that's how everyone came to the conclusion that the +3 bow is the be-all end-all, while Quill Rain, which has similar if not more damage, somehow isn't worth a penny. It's actually insane. And in the end, right, when you go a +4 Carcass Jack for the more AoE, which is more overlap, which is more damage, and then the 50% increased area damage, which is more damage yet again, and then all these other things, right? So then the life, the res, and all these other fantastic things, you end up with a bow that's just significantly better in every scenario, because your Mirage Archer functions better, your attack speed's quicker so you can just right click and then move quicker, so your defenses actually go up, your clear speed goes up, everything goes up with a Quill Rain, and it all goes down on a +3 bow. So I get more damage, more single target, everything, and yet every single build guide I looked at was telling me, this is the bow for you, this is the bow for every man. And I don't think any one of them knew how the skill functioned, let alone maybe looked at an alternative. I don't know if everyone read the same guide initially and just no one bothered to correct the record and no one bothered testing, but I don't know how anyone could recommend this bow with the price difference of like 40x to 1 ALK. It's it's really, really crazy to me. But I'm going to try and be a little bit less negative about this, and I will mention a scenario where I did kind of enjoy it, which is basically, you know, if I'm using the 6-link bow, I could actually afford to put a Colm's Heart if I had enough strength, and that gave me an extra 1000 life. That was kind of nice. So at least in that scenario, I could probably recommend it for hardcore, at least. And in the spirit of keeping this video under 20 minutes, I'm probably going to start just going over the gear now. So as a basic overview of just what gear to get, it would be a Quill Rain. Couldn't recommend it enough. I would say get an additional arrow as a corrupt. It's usually pretty cheap. This might change after this video comes out, obviously, because people love to make a profit off of newfound knowledge, unfortunately. You know, Devoto's Devotion. Why do I pick it? It's got attack speed. Got a lot of attack speed. It's got movement speed. All things that our build, you know, thrives for. It's got Chaos Res, which is just great defensively. And I managed to find it with the additional arrow enchant for super cheap. So, like, obviously this is probably going to go up in price, but I do believe this is a fantastic choice. So then there's the chest piece. Obviously, I recommend the Carcass Jack, especially in the endgame, especially for the consistency that the overlaps give us with the increased AoE. Now, my one on this version has obviously got plus levels on it, but when I was initially testing and I was getting similar damage results anyway, I actually didn't have plus levels on it. I literally was just using a 6-link Quill Rain, and that was comparable damage. So then when I put plus levels on my Carcass Jack, I got even more damage, which is when it really started to outweigh other things. So the big thing to take note of right here is that Toxic Rain actually has several tags on it. It's AoE, it's duration, it's projectile. You can actually get a bunch of different corruptions for this, and even just the +2 is obviously going to be really, really good. So you don't have to go for the cookie cutter, you know, get +2 AoE or anything like that. You can literally get +2 for duration, +2 projectile, +1 gem level, because obviously we're using it in power as well. All of these work, and you can actually end up getting a +4 chest piece with the AoE, with the area damage, with the life, with the res. Makes it best in slot. Really, really hard to replace. However, you can also get other cheap alternatives. So I also had, just for testing purposes, a Belly of the Beast as a +3. Worked great. Sorry, a +4. It was a +4. Worked great. There's literally no difference, like very, very small difference in damage. So you can literally live without it. Obviously, this would matter for the overlap, but not everything else. It's still also fantastic options. You can literally get a Tabula Rasa if you want. It doesn't matter. Plus levels is where you get the damage from. Just, I like Carcass Jack in the end for all the other utility reasons. It fits the build perfectly. You know, these things are always apparently going for a mirror. I literally got this for 20x. I got this at the start of the league. I've been over this a million times about how these things are overpriced. You can throw these things into the temple chamber, just 6-socketed, and then link it after for a fraction of the price. It would literally cost you nothing. You can buy the bases, crazy cheap. And never pay those prices for mirrors on mirrors. I wouldn't recommend it unless you're a rich boy. If you're a rich boy, go ahead and throw your money, man. Money comes and goes. That's currently about all the slots that I would use uniques for. I mean, you could probably get some more on there if you really wanted to, but these ones seem to be the best. The chest is, you know, interchangeable with other ones. The Quill Rain's pretty much standalone on its own. It's like the best in slot as far as it goes. You can also probably swap out the Devotos, but I haven't currently found anything better. I mean, if I was a Trickster, I may use the Vertex, but currently, you know, I don't really like or rate the Trickster right now. So when it comes to all the rares that we've got left over, it's pretty much just asking yourself, can I get Chaos damage on this? Can I get attack speed on this? So this is my quiver. It's actually nowhere near complete. We could get an additional arrow, can get another chaos damage over time multiplier, can get better attack speed. I don't really need the res too much, so I'm actually planning on just getting a straight up damage upgrade for this, but we lack the necessary requirements right now. So we're going to move on to the next piece. My boots. My boots are just straight up, you know, life, res, movement speed. Nothing special here. Just try and get as much as you can. These are really good. And here's my belt. My belt is really good as well. We got tier 1 life, we got tier 1 chaos damage, which is really good, and we got very, very respectable resistances on them, and obviously an increased damage craft. Now it's up to you whether you want the increased damage craft here, or you want, you know, increased maximum life. Up to you, whatever you feel. We've currently got like 5.8k life. I'm quite happy with that. You guys might want more, you might want less. It's up to you, whatever you see fit. Now my gloves, and as you can see, these are really, really, really basic. Unbelievably basic. So just attack speed, life, and chaos damage multi. You can actually get another damage over time multiplier with this. Oh no, just regular damage over time actually. And you can get more resistances. I really would recommend that you get that. I just haven't found one, haven't bothered paying for one. Pretty much stopped looking after I got this because I knew that it had the minimum requirements that I needed. So I stopped there. You can do much, 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 much better. Okay, so I couldn't find any rings that I wanted, so I just self-crafted these myself. So they're not amazing, but they're also exactly what I'm looking for. So they don't need to be as good as people think. I just got chaos damage. I obviously essence crafted these, super cheap. Despair on hit was the only thing that I really wanted mandatory because we're a ranged character. I don't see the need to be like having a blasphemy or using the Witchfire Brew. It's awful, it wastes a slot. We're ranged. I want to be on the other side of the map, avoiding damage with, you know, lots of time to spare. Obviously, this is not true for Cyrus, but for just about every other boss in the game, this happens to be the truth. This other ring here, the only requirement is pretty much the intelligence. We lack intelligence on this build. I recommend just getting it from this one slot here. I also have it on my Ami, but we're going to change that up a little bit later. I could definitely use better rings. Alrighty guys, so onto the final slot, the amulet. This is probably the one I'm having the most trouble with. This is also where we're lacking the most damage. I need a, you know, +1/+1 would be really good. Life, chaos damage over time multiplier, and then I would just craft on the intelligence that I need to finish off the build. However, we don't have this, so I've just, you know, made do with the subpar one. So when people see my damage, understand this. I'm missing a whole arrow. I'm missing better links. I'm missing damage all over the build. We can get far more damage than what I currently have. And we're already able to do everything, so it's, you know, it's all overkill at this point. However, you know, I would like to finish off the build in a perfect min-max sense. However, would I recommend the average person spend this much? Probably not. Just get gear like mine, and then you'll be fine. So that's all the rares, right? And you're probably thinking to yourself, I've had gear similar to this, and I didn't have the same kind of results. What's the big difference? And I would say the introduction of cluster jewels. So whilst my tree started out incredibly similar, and the damage doesn't appear to have, you know, changed that much, it's actually really, really different in functionality as well. So where we used to have, you know, all the points up here and the points down there, we've actually just got cluster jewels now, and I just cut that entire top section off and then went down the bottom, and then rather than get, you know, chaos damage from the usual areas, I just put cluster jewels instead. Now cluster jewels are just a straight up improvement because not only do they give similar damage, they also give the AoE and skill effect duration. So you can just check these out in the POB, but just in case you want to see them now, it's basically a large cluster jewel with damage over time, 8 passives, broadside, tempered arrowheads, 2 jewel slots, which is super important. They go into medium clusters, and the medium clusters just have Eternal Suffering and Wicked Pal on them. They also finish in a jewel as well, which we use to get an additional life, attack speed, and then any form of damage over time, you know, just increased damage, projectile damage, whichever thing scales up our dot, basically. Now, I feel like I'm going to have a repeat of the Cast on Crit Ice Nova character, where the second I start recommending these things, they get bought up, and then they start getting, you know, turned in for profit. So basically, when I was buying these for 1 to 4x each, I'm sure that when you guys go for them, they're going to be crazy expensive. I cannot help this, okay? But, you know, hopefully you guys get in early, hopefully you guys get some of these. If you don't, it's not the end of the world. Alright, so gem links. Now, these are not finalized or anything like that, but these are pretty much the ones I've decided upon. We actually have the pretty standard setup of Toxic Rain, obviously 21, 23 is really, really good. Awaken Vicious Proj, Empower, Awaken Void Manipulation, Awaken Swift Affliction, and Mirage Archer. Now Mirage Archer is kind of a funny one because POB shows it as doing 0 damage, but the reality of it is, right, is that It also puts down pods the same as you do. It adds a bunch to clear, and it actually is like a more damage multiplier, believe it or not. So we put down about 220 pods over the 3.5 seconds, which is where the 15 mil damage comes from. And Mirage Archer, when you click it, doesn't add any extra damage, but the reality of it is you get 80 something pods over that 3.5 second period from the Mirage Archer, and more reliably than yourself, right? Because you stop and, you know, attack and stuff like that, so you've got all these little breaks unless you're preloading damage. Whereas your Mirage Archer never stops. It's very consistent damage, it's very underrated, and POB currently doesn't calculate it, so we probably have more than this 15 mil damage. However, we also don't attack for the whole 3 seconds, so the only time we actually get, you know, 15 mil damage or whatever it is pretty much when we're preloading damage. We will probably eventually swap into Awakened Increased Area of Effect, which we tested a few times. You know, we got very, very similar damage, but currently we just don't possess a quiver for the additional arrow, and we don't possess a really good amulet to sort of supplement any damage loss we may incur. So we're going to get more consistency, we're going to drop a little bit of damage, but then we're actually going to go up because we're getting more overlaps. More overlaps actually equals more damage. Yet again, POB does not calculate this accurately, however, it's a good indicator of, you know, what's to come. Alright, auras, nice and quick. We're just going to go Flesh and Stone, Malevolence. We can fit Skitterbots into the build. I currently haven't, you know, made it happen because I'm lacking int and I want to do a couple of different variations first. However, you know, ultimately those are probably the 3 auras we're going to pick. Why do we like Summon Skitterbots over something like Aspect of the Spider? We don't want to stay close. Why do we like Flesh and Stone? Because it's obviously a fantastic defensive layer, and pretty much Blind gives you 50% chance to evade regardless of anything, and 11% less damage taken from outside sources, which is huge. We're dodge based as well on top of this, and Malevolence just for raw damage and skill effect duration. It's also worth mentioning, guys, the fact that we go Flesh and Stone allows us to use our evasion with Iron Reflexes instead. We also use Hardened Scars as our anointment as well, because we actually use a trick with the Hybrid Flask, which allows us to pretty much have permanent Fortify, and this is one of the most fantastic ways to get a bunch of defensive layers that Pathfinder, or so I should say, Toxic Rain has never had before. Next up, our guard skill. So that is Immortal Core with a cast when damage taken with an increased duration and a Vile Grace. Vile Grace, you pop it when you need it. The reason why we go Immortal Core is because we stack skill effect duration. So it's actually up quite a lot of the time. We have a very low level one, we have a level 4 and a level 6. This is just so it procs quite frequently. And then after that, it's just basically 20% mitigation most of the time. It's pretty good. It's just a fantastic defensive flare. It lasts about 3 seconds. It's really good. The other links here are just pretty much whatever movement skill you want. Hopefully second wind as well on top of it. Grab a portal gem. You know, I hate not having a portal gem. Up to you guys. Do what you want there. Last but not least, obviously your Wither Totem. This is super important for the build, guys. It's where we get a big chunk of damage from. It's also just fantastic to have. One thing I will mention was the build didn't feel great when I was putting down totems at the start. Didn't realize that when you put quality on these, both the multiple totem and the spell totem gives you enough totem placement speed for it not to feel like trash anymore. Put quality on your spell totem and your multi totem and you will feel a million times better using this. Alrighty guys, that's Gemlings. I suppose the last thing we're going to go over is pretty much why did we not go Trickster, right? Everyone I've ever talked to has always said Trickster is better. So I'm relatively sure that this comes from the fact that, one, not a lot of people have played this build, two, not a lot of people are willing to experiment with a build that was already kind of hard to understand. Like, obviously, no one really knew about all the defensive flares or the offensive flares, so the best thing to do was just follow the guy that did know, and then your build would work to some degree. This was paired within 3.6, so about 2 leagues after Toxic Rain came out. Ghost Shrouds were introduced into the game, and when they first came out, they were incredibly overpowered, like just overtuned to shit, where like they would constantly just come back. Every single 1 second you would have 3 charges up. This made for a, you know, really, really powerful defensive layering. So with this powerful defensive layer, all you had to do was stack a bunch of ES, go Trickster, and then you could get full damage. And another thing too was like, you didn't have all the Chaos multi that we have now, so initially Chaos kind of fell behind, and it, you know, continues to fall behind even now. So there was also no other way for you to leech or get any other sort of source of sustain on the build. So basically the only way to build this was Trickster, because otherwise you were just relying on Flask. However, Flask Finder was still an option, but didn't have Chaos damage multi, which is where this whole thing sort of paired up, where it was like, you would get more damage, and you would get OP Ghost Shrouds, and then Trickster was just touted the best. This has since changed, and no one has changed their thinking. So now we're at a point in the game where there's so much Chaos multi that actual regular Chaos damage almost outweighs it. There's also other sources of skill effect duration, there's also other sources of defenses, and Ghost Shrouds have since been nerfed because they were overpowered and overtuned when they first came out. And yet again, there was still no other options, but now that there is, you know, these things have fallen by the wayside. So we can get more damage thanks to clusters, more skill effect duration, which yet again means that it falls behind, and Ghost Shrouds have actually gotten significantly weaker since then. But due to a lack of build guides and a lack of understanding and a lack of interest in Toxic Rain as well, these things have just sort of never changed. So we're sort of in a place where it's like, there was literally 2 video guides I could find that were even remotely close to how to build a proper Trickster, and only one of them could just barely kill Awaken at 8. and this was 1 league ago when it was a bunch easier, and now it's obviously harder, and yet again the damage requirements have gone up. Like, it's so much different now, and that player was quite skillful actually. If you watch the fight, he was dodging everything perfectly, he had a great run, and it was a lot more consistent back then. Consistency is now gone. I think he would be struggling now. I don't want to go too much into detail about it, but long story short, this is why I believe that everyone still thinks that Trickster is better and hasn't reevaluated things. Also, I've done this build quite differently thanks to the changes that have been made. So we implemented Flesh and Stone, we implemented Iron Reflexes, we've implemented all these other things that have now made the life version very comparable. So you had about 7 to 8k EHP before, we've got 6, and we can go up to about 8 if we use the Calm's Heart and stuff like that. But the truly big difference comes in the fact that we have far more layers of mitigation. We have obviously all of our acro, phase acro, which they grab. We're running a Flesh and Stone, which they are not, so we've also got 50% chance to evade on top. We've got Fortify, we've got Iron Reflexes, we've got all these things that the Trickster does not get, so we are getting hit significantly less hard, significantly less often. And because we're a Flask Finder, we actually get Flask and stuff like that, and we get more attack speed, more movement speed, we get all these benefits that the Trickster doesn't get, and we end up just edging ahead by a lot. So you're looking at like 9k in the optimal scenarios for them, 8k for us in the optimal scenario. We get around about the same amount of damage, because obviously, as you know, the more multipliers start to wear off a lot. And then it's like, okay, well, what separates us? They've got Ghost Shrouds, which, you know, fail. We've got about like 50+% mitigation with about 1k HP less on a more reliable buffer, you know what I mean? Also, we've got Flask and they don't, so. At the end of the day, you know, this is still just my opinion. You could still use these layers that they used to have, and I would still just combine it with my damage philosophy, and you're going to end up with a very, very powerful Trickster all the same. But we are now over the 20-minute mark, so I'm going to try and finish this up. So now you guys know about the tree, the gear, the offensive layers, the defensive layers, the reason why we made a couple of the choices we made. The Pantheons are Soul of Lunaris and Soul of Rislatha. For people that are wondering how I league started this, just use a regular guide for the gem links and stuff like that, and I've included how I pathed it on mine and how I progressed it. So it starts off with your regular tree, how you get to mapping, once you're at mapping your early game setup, and then it sort of goes into 1 cluster and 2 cluster, and how I changed my tree. This is no way optimized, guys. So I just want to put this little bit of a disclaimer here, guys. Like, even though I probably put in about 2.5 months worth of effort and testing and work and stuff like that, there's still so many different variations of the build I need to try. The POB changed halfway through, so I had to redo my calculations. I have my own calculations which give me different things, but like, the big thing that I want people to recognize is that this is in no way a finished min-maxed build. This is just an improvement upon what was basically the nothing information that we had so far, so that people can start playing around with this themselves, play around with gem links. Maybe someone wants to put like 1,000 hours into the spread pattern and sort of work out exactly how they feel about it, and you know, they can truly optimize it. Maybe we'll find out that 200 AoE is better for 7 pods, you know what I mean? For reference as well, I only have 6 overlapping pods to get this amount of damage, because I'm fairly confident at least 6 of my pods are hitting at any given time. But, you know, we'll eventually probably need someone to do like 1,000 maps with increased AoE to sort of truly tell us this. Could be a good job for Slippery Jim, just putting that out there. If anyone wants to tag him in this, just saying. So my final thoughts for the build itself, or the skill itself, is actually that it's a truly underutilized and almost unheard of skill. It's a fantastic league starter, it does all content reliably, it now has the damage it needs to truly push it to the end game, and there's other ways to build it that have just never really been touched on or thought about or anything like that, which means that this build just has so much more potential to go. Like, I'm still lacking damage, I'm still lacking things, despite, you know, being able to do everything in the game. There's still so much more that you could do with this build, and I truly hope that people play this build more often, and I myself plan on, you know, revisiting this skill eventually at some point, and retesting and redoing things, and just seeing where it takes us. There's just so much more to discover about this, you know, pretty underutilized skill. So if you liked the video, like, subscribe, all that jazz, guys. Have a good one. We did this boss in under 2 seconds with this bow, the crappy one. Now we're going to use the best in slot bow, and we're going to try out the same damage, okay? So it's got should do a 2-second boss kill. Shouldn't even be able to move, okay? All my flask up, preloading our damage, under 2 seconds. Pretty close. Question is, 40x? Slower? 1x? I don't know, man. You be the judge if it's worth it.